Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Sarah Bucic. I'm a policy consultant with the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. Today's webinar will be recorded and sent to all those who registered, and 1 hour of nursing continuing education will be offered. An evaluation link will be sent out and will also be given in the chat near the end of the webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments and the California Nurses for Environmental Health and Justice. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Barb Sattler to do the introductions. I'm just going to pause here for just one moment. Looks like we're still letting a number of people in, so if you could just sit tight. All right, thank you all for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have two amazing speakers today. Our first speaker is Samia Ayagari. She is an MSN and MPH, and she's also a public health nurse who focuses on addressing the social determinants of health to make healthcare more equitable and accessible for all. Having worked as a home visiting nurse with Philadelphia Nurse Family Partnership, she has seen firsthand the adverse impacts of food insecurity and climate change on health and families and communities in Philadelphia. This work drove her to seek systematic solutions to health challenges in her home visiting clients and the things they faced. She joined the Save Soil movement in 2021 when she learned that healthy soils are necessary for alleviating climate change, ensuring adequate water supply, and protecting food security, and much more. She was motivated to become a coordinator for the Save Soil movement in Philadelphia when she learned that soil on Earth is projected to run out in 60 years. After a year of coordinating efforts in Philadelphia, Samia transitioned to working and organizing Save Soil efforts across North America. Her role involves raising awareness about soil degradation and solutions needed to protect soils. Our second speaker today will be Meg Adelman. She is an RN, BSN, MPH, and was an early adopter of the organic plant-based food movement. Zach and Meg Adelman started a superfood company, Navitas Organics, in 2003, and Meg eventually went on to pursue a nursing career in ambulatory surgery as a PACU pre-op nurse. After 7 years in that specialty area, Meg followed her passion for preventative medicine and improving population health writ large. After obtaining an MPH in 2017 at the University of San Francisco with an emphasis on public health nutrition, Meg expanded her nursing role as a health educator, leading workshops for nurses on organic and healthy nutrition, food policy advocacy, as well as program development. She successfully launched a robust employee wellness program at Navitas and leads the cause marketing department, supporting volunteerism and corporate sustainability efforts on behalf of the company. In 2019, she co-created Future Well, a wellness meets climate summit hosted on Regenerative Organic Farm in California with the goal of integrating the wellness movement and climate activism, centered on the importance of soil health. Her interests in improving population health focuses on the adoption of organic and plant-focused diets and climate-smart agriculture, specifically through the expansion of regenerative organic farming. Navitas Organics is entering its 20th year in business and continues to champion efforts to improve the lives of people and the planet through corporate sustainability practices and organic plant-focused nutrition. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Samia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So again, my name is Soumya Ayagari, and I am a public health nurse. And how I was drawn to this work is that I worked with Nurse Family Partnership, which is a program where a nurse works with families during the pregnancy until the time the child is 2 years old. And these are primarily families with limited financial means. And I really gained a lot of experience working and seeing firsthand, as Sarah said, about the impact of food insecurity and the impact of climate change on the clients that I was working with. And then I'm somebody who likes to look into the root cause of some of these issues. And it became clear that the root causes were structural, in that people weren't able to afford certain foods. Folks weren't able to get the nutrition that they needed. And when I kept digging deeper and deeper, it all related back to the soil and the fact that the food scarcity and the prices are also related to the soil not being available to grow enough crops. Furthermore, some of the nutrient deficiencies that I was seeing are also related to the soil not having the nutrients that it needs. So I'll go into it in much more depth, but just wanted to share a little bit about why I got interested in the Save Soil movement. So I'm going to share more about what the Save Soil movement is, and we can go ahead and jump into the presentation. So next slide, please. So why should we care about soil? Well, a lot of us who are familiar with environmental issues have heard words like climate change, carbon emissions, air pollution, and water scarcity, but few of us have really paid attention to soil. So for thousands of years, life on Earth has been sustained by a very thin layer of fertile soil on the Earth's crust, and it's really vital for our survival and for most other life forms on the planet. Next slide. So why is this an important subject to discuss now? Well, according to the UN, we might only have 60 years of soil left, and we're losing an acre of fertile soil every second. So you can just think about what that would mean. Here we are talking, and this webinar is supposed to last an hour or a little less than that. And if we're losing an acre of fertile soil every second within the time frame of this webinar, we will have lost between 45 and 60 acres, or sorry, much more than that. I said that that would be how much we would have lost if this webinar lasts just a minute. But you can just extrapolate how much more that would mean as far as what would be lost in an hour. So this means that in the near future, agriculture will not yield sufficient food for human populations, and we are quietly but surely moving towards disastrous famines on a global scale. So next slide, please. And so this picture just shows you a snapshot of the degradation. The very light yellow areas show areas of low carbon in the soil, and the areas that are darker orange colored or maroon colored, those have higher amounts of carbon in the soil. And I'll explain why that's important in just a moment. But the key takeaway here is that the world has already lost 52% of the agricultural soil, and the US itself has lost 50% of its topsoil. So that's very concerning. Next slide. So why is soil something that we really need to focus on, and how does carbon play a role? Well, soil itself is not an inert substance. It is not just a resource that we can mine. It is a living, complex system. So it's one of the most biologically complex systems on the Earth, if not the known universe. So the organisms within the soil, the microbes, the fungi, the worms, the other small little life forms that we don't really see or think about too much, they're doing all of the work when it comes to making sure that the soil can actually grow the food that we eat. And in order for them to be able to do their job, they need food too. And so that food comes in the form of organic content, which is that carbon that I was referring to. So where that carbon comes from is through animal waste and plant matter. And so this is not new information. This is something that farmers and growers have known about for a long time. And for time immemorial, we've known that this is important. So this is something that just needs to be maintained in order to ensure that soil is living and healthy. And furthermore, bringing this agricultural land under vegetation and shade can really help to improve the health of the soil. If we don't have this 3 to 6% organic content, then the soil loses its ability to sustain life and it becomes sand. And that is not something that can support our life forms because we can't grow our food. So next slide, please. So the Save Soil movement comes in because we're trying to raise awareness about the degradation that's occurring and also what we can do to reverse this. And Save Soil is a global movement launched by Sadhguru, who is a leader from India, who is a global visionary and has worked in environmental issues for over 30 years to save soil from extinction and also to bring the necessary policies to address this catastrophic issue facing humanity. So the movement has gained a lot of support from many global leaders, including institutions like the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the World Economic Forum, and also influential folks like the Dalai Lama and Jane Goodall. Next slide, please. So I won't go into who all these people are because you've probably seen them before, but this is just to indicate the level of support that the movement has from influential people in a variety of different fields. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of background as far as how the Save Soil movement as we know it today got started. So I mentioned that the movement was started by Sadhguru. So what he did was he knew that this was a catastrophic issue and that humanity really had to come together and pay attention to this issue in order to take action. So to raise awareness and really galvanize people's interest in this very critical moment and critical matter, what he did was he rode on a motorcycle for 100 days, and it was 30,000 kilometers across 27 nations from the UK all the way to southern India. And he did that within a matter of 100 days. And this led to a resounding call to action, and many people became aware of soil who had never really heard about its importance before, including myself. And so as a result of this bike ride and the movement that was generated and a lot of the awareness that was created over social media and on the ground, over 4 billion people have been touched by the movement. And also 81 nations have agreed to act to save soil. So that's to give you a little bit of context as to how the movement in its current iteration got started. So next slide, please. And then to give you a little bit of background, I said in its current iteration, so in 2022 is when the Save Soil movement was launched, when that bike ride that we just talked about got started. But Sadhguru had been working on soil conservation efforts for over 30 years, specifically in India with regard to agroforestry and river revitalization. And you can see some of the details here on this timeline. I know in my bio, it said that I started working with the movement in 2021. I just want to correct that. It was in 2022, as that's when the movement actually got started. So next slide, please. All right, so how is Save Soil movement actually relevant to other global efforts to address our well-being? Well, it is directly related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see them here on your screen. And there are ways in which ensuring healthy soils impacts all of these different metrics. I'll elaborate on a couple of them, but I'll go much more in depth as I progress through the presentation. So the first piece of zero hunger is a pretty obvious one. And the reason that zero hunger is connected to the soil degradation crisis is that if you have soil that is healthy, then we're better able to raise the crops that we need to support the human population. and that will inherently lead to reducing hunger. Another piece is good health and well-being, and I believe Meg is going to go more into this in her presentation. But if the soil itself has better nutrients and is healthy, then our plants will have the nutrients that they need in order to sustain themselves. And then when we eat those plants, they are much more nutritious for us, and it's much better for our immune system and our energy and our ability to be healthy. So those are a couple sustainable development goals that are related, but all of these aspects are related, and I'll elaborate more about that in just a moment. So next slide, please. So I talked about these other aspects. So just simplifying the last slide a little bit, there's 6 main areas that soil degradation impacts, and it impacts food crisis, water scarcity, loss of biodiversity, climate change, loss of livelihood, and conflict and migration. And these aspects, I'm going to talk about them separately, but as you can imagine, they're all interrelated. So next slide. So food crisis, we've already talked about this a little bit. So in 20 years, we're anticipating that there will be 40% less food produced for 9.3 billion people. And so that's going to exacerbate some of the food insecurity that we are already seeing today. Also, you know, as nurses, we know that there's many of our patients and our clients that have nutrient deficiencies. I myself just had some blood work, and I was shown that I was slightly anemic. And the reason why many of us have some of these nutrition deficiency today is because our soils are poorer than they were before. So today's fruits and vegetables already contain 90% fewer nutrients than about 100 years ago. So just to like offer a more concrete example, to get the same nutrition out of one orange that maybe our ancestors ate 100 years ago, today we would have to eat 8 oranges. So that just gives you a sense as far as how the soil degradation crisis affects us on an immediate level. So next slide, please. And then water scarcity is another aspect. So soils that don't have that 3 to 6% organic content that are not healthy, they cannot absorb and regulate water flow. So the lack of water retention leads to water scarcity and droughts and floods. But the good news is that when we enrich the soil with that organic content, it can hold up to 90% of its weight in water and release it slowly over time. So many of us have seen that there have been challenges within our own nation related to water scarcity, especially on the West Coast, and then ensuring that we have more healthy soils, or healthier soils, excuse me, is a solution to address this crisis with regard to water scarcity. So next slide, please. And another aspect is thinking of biodiversity. So essentially, not only is saving soil important for human beings, but it's important for all the other life around us on the planet. And the complex living system of soil sustains the plants that grow out of it, the animals that eat those plants. Really, I'm offering a very simplistic explanation, but you can imagine how many different complex life forms, animals, plants, fungi, rely on this system. And if it's gone, those animals, plants, and other life forms will be gone as well. So scientists are saying that around 27,000 species of life forms are becoming extinct every year because of a loss of habitat, and soil degradation is a big contributor to this. So next slide, please. Another aspect is climate change. So climate change, you might be wondering, well, what does that have to do with soil? So carbon stored in the soil is 3 times that living in plants. So that means that soil is really important for something called carbon sequestration. So carbon sequestration is just a fancy way of saying it's a process in which the soil takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stores it in the soil. So if the world's soils are not revitalized, it could release 850 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So this is more than all of humanity's emissions in the last 30 years. But the good news is, if we put that organic content back into the soil, that 3 to 6% I was mentioning, that will help to promote the process of the carbon sequestration of the soil, pulling that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and back into the soil. And not only will that support our ability to grow food, but will also be a mechanism to address and help alleviate the rapidly accelerating temperatures that we're seeing nowadays. Next slide, please. So another aspect that is really important to consider is, how does this affect the farmers? So if the soil degradation is severe enough, that means that farmers, who are really the backbone of many aspects of our society because they grow our food, will not be able to make a profit. This first bullet point is relevant on a global scale, so that it is a global metric. So thousands of farmers across the globe are committing suicide due to the loss of income from the soil depletion. And 74% of those living in poverty, again globally, are directly affected by land degradation. Furthermore, within the US itself, the CDC states that those who have careers related to agriculture are among the highest at risk for suicide. And we know that we have a mental health crisis in our country. So this soil degradation crisis certainly is a factor with regard to the mental health of folks who are working in agriculture. And it's very important to remember this aspect. So next slide. And then another related aspect is conflict and migration. So when people are living in an area where the soil is depleted, it's no longer able to sustain the growth of food for crops, nor is it able to sustain things like livestock who eat plants that grow out of the soil, then people don't have food. That same soil that loses its organic content is unable to retain water. And when people don't have food and water, and they don't have a means to sustain themselves, then they will move naturally in order to survive and find a better place for themselves and their family to thrive. They will move. And so as a result, they will go to wherever they can in order to get the resource that they need to support themselves and their family. And so today we already know that there are massive numbers of people migrating across the planet, and this is only going to be increased as the soil degradation crisis is exacerbated. So population growth and food and water scarcity could cause over 1 billion people to migrate to other regions and countries by 2050. And that is just something to really keep in mind, because not only do we have to think about how might the soil degradation impact our personal health regarding food we might have access to, but we have to think about the social situations that are predicted to arise in the coming decades as a result of this as well, and how we're all going to be impacted. Next slide, please. So just to sort of solidify some of what I said before, some projections from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization are that crop yields could fall 50% in certain regions due to climate change and soil extinction. And also, food and water scarcity could force over 1 billion people to leave their homes and migrate. But this is not a doomsday statement. This is really an opportunity for us to act now. And if we act now, then we have the beautiful chance to be able to be the generation that reverses this. So next slide, please. So that's where the Save Soil movement comes in. And really what the Save Soil movement is working to do is to advocate for policies across 193 nations towards soil restoration. And the primary mechanism that we are advocating for is increasing the organic content in agricultural lands to a minimum of 3 to 6%. Now, in order for those policies to be in place, it must be a priority for the policymakers. And in order for it to be a priority for the policymakers, they must feel that it is a priority for their constituents. They must feel like this is an election issue, that this is something that voters will feel is make or break on. And so where the Save Soil movement is really focusing our energy is to inspire about 4 billion people, so that's 60% of the world's electorate, to be aware of the soil degradation crisis, to be aware of what can be done as far as solutions, and to really ensure that people are speaking up and are talking about soil as something that's important to them. And this will inherently lend itself to lead towards policy redirections to safeguard, nurture, and sustain soils. So next slide, please. And so we are very happy to report that in the 2 years that the movement has been flourishing, since that 2022 bike ride, we have had some great developments. So across the globe, there have been many grassroots efforts to really mobilize people and increase awareness about the importance of soil and why we need to express that it is important to us and why we need to preserve it for future generations. So as I mentioned before, we have reached over 4 billion people. And then, so today is Save Soil Day, which is the anniversary of the launch of the Save Soil movement, that bike ride that I was telling you about earlier. And to date, we have had over 110 cities in North America proclaim March 21st as Save Soil Day as a method of raising awareness and further amplifying the need to draw attention to this issue. Over 3 million children have written to their national leaders, and you can see some of the other major developments here. And I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail as far as what's been accomplished from the global stage as well with regard to the movement. So next slide. So one really big development was at COP15, which is a global convention led by the United Nations Convention on, I believe it's UNCCD, which is the UN arm that is working to address desertification. What happened was they convened a large conference called COP15 in 2022. And at that conference, Sadhguru addressed 197 parties and expressed the importance of having a minimum of 3 to 6% organic content in agricultural soil. And the main thrust of this message was that in order for soil to be preserved, farmers need to be able to benefit financially. And he expressed these 3 prongs, which you can see on your screen. And these really capture a variety of different strategies for addressing and ensuring that farmers are actually benefiting financially in this effort, because we cannot do this without them. So next slide, please. And then more recently in COP28, which was a global UN climate conference that happened in December, and I understand Ani was there as well. At COP28, Save Soil had the opportunity to be part of the Blue Zone Pavilion, which is a arena where primarily the most influential global entities can take the stage and be able to present and share information. So we were very honored to have that distinction along with the likes of nation states. And the importance of COP28 is that Save Soil and other partner organizations were able to focus the conversation around the importance of agricultural resilience and supporting farmers as a climate change addressing strategy. And what came out of COP28 was that the United Arab Emirates made a declaration on the importance of agricultural resilience as a climate change strategy, as a strategy for addressing climate change. And this had never, ever been done before at a global climate conference. So we're very happy that this large development, this large accomplishment took place, because it creates more momentum to move towards the policy changes that we're looking for. So next slide, please. And so you might be wondering about what nurses can do. Well, there's a number of ways that nurses can be involved with the Save Soil movement. Time and again, nurses are viewed by the public as the most trusted profession. And one thing that is important related to that is that not only does the public trust us, but also government officials trust us as well. So I believe in the chat, it will be shared with you all a mechanism to write letters to your leaders. So we have form letters on our website. It's at savesoil.org/write, where you can write a letter to your leader, and you can use our form template and also customize it. And that's a really great way to advocate and express your concern. Another aspect is attending community events. So our community events are happening across the country. The link is in the chat. You can see where a community event is happening near you and get involved with the Save Soil movement near your neighborhood. And then you can also do something called becoming an Earth Buddy, which means that you commit to spending about 10 minutes a day talking about the importance of soil to your friends and family, or sharing on social media with the hashtag Save Soil. If you go to savesoil.org, you can learn more about this. And then I'll go to the next slide. And then to find out more about what being an Earth Buddy is, or to learn more about how you can get involved on a local level, you can scan this QR code and be added to a WhatsApp group to learn about regional efforts near you. So I want to be respectful of our time here. So I'll want to ask Sarah how we're doing.
We're doing great on time. We're doing excellent. We have a few questions in the chat, but we can wait until the end, because I'm not sure if you or Meg would want to answer those. So but we're doing excellent.
Thanks, everyone. I'll pass it on to Meg then.
Thanks so much.
Just give me a moment to load my slides.
One of the questions in the chat while we're waiting, and perhaps some of you want to address this, was addressing carbon capture technology. Is there anything additional you could add on that?
So that is a really good question. I think that I would need to get back to you regarding carbon capture technology. I know that there's a lot of work being done in this area, but what I can do is I can put my email in the chat right now, and I'll make sure to look into that for you and get back to whoever asked that question.
Wonderful. And there's another question in the chat. Oh, okay, great.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt if you want to finish the question.
No, not at all. Go for it.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to be talking more about the soil to human health connection. And so today we're going to be talking about humans coevolution, our human health coevolution with the soil health. We're going to look briefly at farming's reality today, talk about the delicate dance of microbial diversity and how it relates to human health. We're going to touch on some better ways of promoting human health and soil health equally with organic and regenerative organic agriculture. So I always love to refer to some of the giants on this subject. Wendell Berry was known for his insight in the topic of the soil to human health connection. He was a novelist, an environmentalist, and farmer who published more than 80 books, but is best known for his book, The Unsettling of America, which argued that responsible small-scale agriculture was essential to the preservation of both land and culture. And, you know, he said, eating is an agricultural act. And what he meant by this was to say that we all play an integral role in agriculture, whether that be directly or indirectly. We are, as consumers, support the food choices that we make through our monetary dollars. Those dollars then affect and influence the production practices of those foods and those crops. That influence extends from land management practices to basic supply and demand pressure, and ultimately policy and government support. So while it's important that we choose our foods wisely just for our own health, it's also critical that we make a statement about the effects of this chemically dominant food system that exists right now. And as nurses, I find this one to be quite poignant. The food industry is responsible for nourishing the nation, but prioritizes profits, taste, convenience, and shelf life more than they do on nutritional quality. And our healthcare industry, the biomedical model anyway, prioritizes crisis care, focusing on the disease rather than the whole person, and doesn't factor in the role of nutrition as it addresses the root causes of the diseases that they're looking to treat. But yet these two giant industries have the influence and the power we need to shift priorities for the greater good and the protection of the health of all beings on the earth. So hopefully we can see these come into greater alignment at some point. And lastly, Wendell Berry emphasized that we are what we eat eats too. And that means that all of the influences that the crops and the foods have in their journey from soil to plate will impact our health in one way or the other. And whether that's through the agrochemicals that are used in the intensive farming model that's dominant now, or just the soil lacking in beneficial micronutrients that we humans need to flourish, especially during critical developmental periods. Whether that's there or it's not there, all of this makes a huge impact on human health over time. And so while this can seem a little ominous, it's also powerful in that we can be really discerning about what we put in our bodies to try to reduce exposures to harmful chemicals and get the best nutritional benefit from the food we eat. So one of the big issues is with regards to soil degradation and human health impacts is that the modern farm doesn't look like this anymore. Sort of this bucolic farm setting where animals graze freely, lush landscapes suggest abundance of water and biodiversity of plant species. And in reality, we're farming more like this. It's a chemically intensive farming model that causes desertification and topsoil loss, as Samuya mentioned. It leaves large swaths of land barren without any crops planted, without roots in the ground that helps to sequester carbon and build microbial diversity in the soil, which is what we depend on for life. In the upper right corner, this is a photo of monocropping, which is the predominant practice in the United States. And it's the planting of one crop over large areas of land, which really undermines the natural order of things where different species have a symbiotic benefit to one another, and they have a protective value and keeping the standards of health and biodiversity intact. This is a farming practice that contributes to water and air pollution, not just from agrochemicals, but also from CAFOs, which are confined animal feeding operations, where most of the meat that you find in the grocery store, upwards of 90% of that meat is cultivated in this way. And, you know, we also had the rise of rampant disease, viral and bacterial disease that spreads in these CAFOs, which then finds its way into the meat supply as well. So all of these things are really undermining human health in a variety of ways, and also soil health. So when we've asked the question, does soil microbial environments contribute to the human microbiome? There's been a lot of emerging study in this field, and a journal article from Microorganisms in 2019 sort of looked at the evolution of microbial diversity in the human gut over time, and compared it from pre-industrial times to industrial times, primarily after World War II, when we started intensive farming. And the sheer diversity of microorganisms has declined significantly over the course of times, as humans have had less and less contact with the natural environment due to urbanization and direct contact with the soil itself. And to note, soil is far more abundant in microbial life than the microbiome. In fact, the human microbiome may only have 10% of microbial diversity that is found in soil, but we are a mirror of the environments that we interact with most intimately. And so this image here shows kind of the difference between sort of that hunter-gatherer period of time versus after industrial ag was introduced. And it shows that, you know, between the decrease in microorganisms itself, the loss of contact with our natural environments, an increase in hygiene measures, the use of agrochemicals and antibiotics, and ultimately dependence on poor diets, diets that are shifting more towards processed foods, have shown significant decrease in microbial diversity in both soil and human microbiome. And this really tracks with the rise of chronic disease. And the microbiome is a huge player in that. So as this symbiotic connection to nature was disrupted over time, we see that it's led to negative health outcomes in the population. So when we ask that question, whether the soil and the microbiome are connected, there's plenty of emerging science to suggest that it is. And so the human microbiome has trillions of microorganisms and 200 million protein-encoded genes. These microorganisms play essential roles in physiological processes, including digestion, immune function, metabolism, and overall protection against pathogens and promotion of homeostasis in the human body. Poor dietary choices really alter that balance in the microbiome, and this impairs the work of the immune system to protect us and predisposes us to a wide variety of metabolic and autoimmune disorders. In addition, there's an increase in the use of food additives and residual contaminants from agricultural practices. Byproducts from food packaging and processing also are starting to show a link towards disease development. So it really does come down to that balance within the microbiome of both healthy, beneficial bacteria that will predicate an inflammatory response in the body, and that chronic inflammation is where we start to, over time, see the development of chronic disease and arterial damage, which then communicates to vital organ systems in the body. And so researchers have now pointed to specific bacteria that are abundant when we see a specific disease diagnosis. And then other bacteria that are help to build resilience against disease and are offering a protective benefit to the host. And so we see that the human microbiome is relatively stable, but that gut microbial dynamics really are influenced by dietary and lifestyle choices. This image was taken from another journal in experimental medicine from 2019. It looked at the role of microbial activity as it relates to the metabolism of nutrients and the modulation of the immune response, and specifically as it communicates with vital organ systems. The author of this review pointed out that there are specific biochemicals that are generated by the microbes that regulate cell function in the endothelial lining. And all of this is sort of based on this healthy balance of the right bacteria. In the absence of this microbiota, the functional ability of the immune system starts to become compromised. But the authors concluded that we do, in fact, have the ability to rehabilitate the microbiome through a healthier diet, and specifically monitoring declines of those biochemical markers that would indicate a loss of beneficial microbes. And we can do this long before the disease develops. So not only is the microbiome a critical player in the development of chronic disease, but also to mental health conditions and cognition overall. So when that balance becomes disrupted, microbial injury ensues and inflammation follows. And this microbial injury has been linked with many mental health illnesses, depression, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, and more. So we really need to consider the whole picture of how food is farmed, because in the end, we are what we eat eats too. The gold standard of healthy diet in the research literature is the Mediterranean diet, and it's highly regarded as a healthy, balanced diet. It boasts a beneficial fatty acid profile, rich in both monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. It has high polyphenols and other antioxidants that help to prevent oxidative stress, and abundant fiber through low glycemic carbohydrates. It's a plant-forward way of eating, and it minimizes animal protein intake. And when we look at the comparison between what the med diet, how it relates to the microbiome and subsequent disease versus that of the standard American Western diet, or SAD, they pinpoint specific microorganisms that are responsible for having either an inverse relationship with cardiovascular disease, inflammation, diabetes, obesity, et cetera, with the med diet. Conversely, specific microorganisms are present with the Western diet, and all of those are linked to a wide variety of chronic metabolic disorders. This slide says the gluten-free diet requires a little bit more study, because it is turned into more of a processed food diet than anything else. So just as food is medicine, and our food comes from the land and the soil, it follows the same train of thought that farming should be thought of as medicine as well. We need diversity in both systems to create stability. If the human microbiome is a direct reflection of the environments that we interact with most intimately, we can see how soil and how human and soil health are inextricably tied. At the top of this graphic, it's kind of a busy slide, but it suggests that essentially what happens with chemical farming and the harmful agricultural inputs negatively affect both human and environmental health equally. It destroys microorganisms in the soil, leading to desertification and topsoil loss. And those same chemicals are responsible. They're known carcinogens, endocrine disrupting chemicals, neurotoxins, and are detrimental to human health in a variety of ways. Not only do these chemicals lower the nutrients that are available for plants to absorb, they start to render those plants less nutritious overall. So, and we're not getting the nutrition that we need to survive. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that there's just a complementary system without the use of those chemicals, and that each supports the other in protecting the environment in the same way that it protects us. I don't want to talk too much about this, but just to drive home the point that most of the intensive farming that exists today, it also degrades the soil, is primarily used to promote the types of harmful foods that exist in the standard American diet. Ultra-processed foods is gaining a lot of recognition and traction right now, but it's everything you would imagine it to be. Located in the center aisles of the grocery store. They are highly processed, fast, and convenience foods, taking over the food system and served up to children in schools and to the most vulnerable populations in our country. These are calorie-rich but nutrient-deficient foods, and they are the ingredients from which are found from industrial food manufacturing, to create hydrogenated oils, high fructose corn syrup, flavoring agents, emulsifiers, and like. And obviously, there's a lot of research showing that those who eat these foods generally end up consuming more calories, gain more weight, and are fall prey to chronic disease development. So it's all part of the same problem. And there is a better way of farming that's good for both humans and the environment. One is this, the organic farming and the organic USDA label, which ensures that your food is always going to be non-GMO and produced without harmful pesticides, chemical preservatives, or antibiotics. Organic farming protects the frontline farm workers who are doing the work of farming to get the food to our plates. And also organic food has been shown to have higher nutrient values and antioxidants and omega-3s as compared to food produced in more chemical farming domain. So lastly, I'm going to touch on regenerative agriculture or regenerative organic agriculture. This is an emerging philosophy about farming that goes above and beyond organic to improve soil health and to help combat climate change through greater soil carbon sequestration in the soil, and promotes biodiversity in a variety of ways. Regenerative organic actively regenerates natural resources while supporting healthy and thriving communities. It's a philosophy that has a lot of different features to it, some represented here in the slide, but overall, it's focused squarely on improving the soil health and combating climate change. Regenerative agriculture works to improve soil structure, increase water retention in the soil, increase the health and wealth of all inhabitants within the ecosystem, including human beings. And it's a non-chemical system that uses animal integration and rotational grazing to cultivate the soil. So regenerative agriculture really shifts this paradigm where we're competing with nature to a place where we're partnering with nature in a system that disturbs the soil to a system that protects and regenerates the soil. We're going to go from monoculture to abundant biodiversity and complementary planning and a more holistic approach to farming that is better for both people and planet. And it will go a long way to meeting the moment today where climate change and soil loss continues to threaten our very existence on this planet. And I'm happy to share this with nurses because nurses are going to be critical in this movement, in the support of healthy people dependent on a thriving planet. And that all starts with the soil. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg and Samia. This was so amazing, and there's so much new information, and we have so many amazing questions in the chat. One of the things that has come up in the chat was about PFAS being found in soils. I'm not sure if either one of you, maybe Samia, if you wanted to speak to that as part of BioSludge. I know some of our participants are looking at materials to educate children. So I wasn't sure if either one of you wanted to address any additional points.
So with regard to PFAS in the soil, I have to be fully transparent that that is something that I would need to look more into and certainly research on. But I know that PFAS, I learned from Ani actually about the crisis and the ubiquitous nature of PFAS and the fact that it's in our water, and so naturally it would also be in our soil. But I would personally need to learn more about how that specifically relates to soil. I'm sure there are some people on this call who might have an answer if anybody would like to speak up.
I would actually just mirror what Samia just said with regards to PFAS and it just being doesn't degrade. So it's probably, with the same idea that it's in water, we can believe that it's probably pervasive in the soil as well.
With regard to children's resources, just switching gears a bit, I did put in the chat the name of this book called What is Mud? It explains in really simple language the importance of soil and the soil degradation crisis in terms that children can understand. And it's brilliant in that way. So I see some of my colleagues who are home visitors from Philadelphia on the call. So perhaps that is something that would be useful with your clients, or if you have pediatric clients or family members who are kids, your own kids, other kids in your family, that could be a great way to educate folks. We also have letters that are specific to children on our website, so I can put the link from that in the chat. We have an initiative to engage school children in letter writing, so I'll do that right now, and hopefully that'll be a useful resource.
Wonderful. There was also a question, and maybe Meg, this would be for you, for folks who have low incomes or people who are isolated from their community. Any suggestions for how to access some of those healthier foods?
Yes. Well, first off, there are ways to navigate buying organic and locally produced foods that are farmed holistically. One is I would refer people to the EWG website. There's, a list that has been compiled of the clean 15 and dirty dozen, the foods that are most likely to contain harmful chemicals. A lot of it has to do with produce that has a shell. So if it has a shell, it's likely that the pesticides aren't going to be able to penetrate into the food itself, and others that don't. So those resources are there, and it helps people to purchase organic food, and only when it's the most necessary, and buy conventional when they know that it's unlikely that the high load of agrochemicals will be in the food itself. The other thing is check your local, farmers markets where people are not necessarily at. That's a challenge, but sometimes farmers markets have market matches where they basically match SNAP benefits, so you can get additional food. But I recognize that it's a challenge for folks that are living in food deserts. That's why we've always been proponents of creating standards within our institutional settings like schools and hospitals where that's the standard of nutrition, so that people are not being fed foods that are known to cause health effects, but in fact, it's going to change the whole system if we can shift demand in that way, where we have school purchasing and hospital purchasing really leading the way in organic food procurement. So that's just as an aside.
Thank you so much. I know we are at the top of the hour, but Dr. Sattler, I'm not sure if you had any additional thoughts to close us out.
Yeah, sorry for not being with you. I live a little off the grid and my internet was off. I just a terrific job, Megan and Samia, absolutely. And I do think that there are, at least in many of the agricultural states, statewide policies that we as nurses should be involved in, and nationally, the food and farm bills, and I don't know how many years, Meg probably knows this, and maybe Samia, that the USDA puts out its guidance for nutrition, and making sure that we have more information on why it's important to choose organic, why it's important to not be using ultra-processed. I mean, that we should be really engaged in helping people make healthy choices on their foods, and then making the policies so that it is easier. And I just wrote a few here, which includes looking at what kinds of foods and food opportunities are given to the poor through the Women, Infant, and Children programs, through our school lunch programs. These are programs supported by the USDA. It is the second largest budget in the country, second only to the military budget. So we spend a lot of money in this country feeding people. Let's make sure that what they feed them is good food, nutritious food that is supporting a healthy agricultural system, the food system as a whole. So I do think we have opportunities as nurses to bring our voices at the local levels, through our schools, our children's schools, at our hospitals and nursing homes and universities, through institutional purchasing, as well as state and federal policies. And to Samia's examples, also to international policies. And just want to thank you all, just did an absolutely terrific job.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining. You will receive a recording of today's webinar along with the evaluation with the email you registered for. So thank you all so much for a great discussion.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.